as a government, we understand fully the disquiet that Ghanaians have expressed, the anxiety that has greeted this measure. It's perfectly understandable because we are talking about people who have endured terrible hardships in the last 8 years. Taxes have been piled upon them. Their cost of living has gone through the roof, and they have endured a lot of suffering, which in any event was the reason why they booted out the NPP in the manner that they did. So it is to be expected that any additional measure would attract some concern, and we respect that fully. Except that we are at a juncture that requires decisive action. Otherwise, this whole economy will be brought down by the energy sector. To begin with something, it is true that there's inefficiency, and I will speak to some of it. The horrible criminal happenings at ECG and elsewhere that have led us to this particular juncture. Something, even before this government took over, and let me stress that there's a government that has been in place for barely 6 months, even before we took over, to begin with, we had to deal with what we call energy legacy debt of 67 billion Ghana cedis. That is even before we lifted a finger as a government. Now, this is not debt that you can ignore. You have to pay. And it piles on for as long as it remains on your books. And it is not as though we have done nothing about it. Something, this year, if you look at the budget, the finance minister is giving the energy minister 23 billion Ghana cedis to settle part of this debt. 23 billion Ghana cedis. Now, this debt has come about because, as we all know, perhaps we don't talk about it much, but as we all know, even if ECG collected all the monies due them, the money will not be up to how much is spent to produce power and distribute it. If ECG collected all the money, and that is because of the way that the tariff is structured. That is the first point. So, under recoveries is one of the reasons why we have a 67 billion Ghana cedi, and this has been there for decades. The second point is that arising out of deliberate policy of the Akufo-Addo administration, this legacy debt was compounded. For many years, a critical component for producing power, which is the purchase of fuel, was not added to the tariff. The president and cabinet took a decision that consumers should not pay for that, but government will pay for it. Something for they did not pay for it. So all the liquid fuel they bought, a significant part of it remains unpaid for. So it is debt that you and I have to shoulder. The criminal mismanagement of the exchange rate, and I heard Bawumia waxing lyrical as I came in. His mismanagement of the exchange rates led to a situation where between July 2022 to November that year, the dollar or the cedi exchanged at the dollar for 17 cedis. It rose from 6 cedis to $1 to 17 cedis. That is an addition of 11 cedis. And you know that IPPs are paid in dollars. And some of the inputs into power generation are bought in dollars. So once this happened, huge debt was accrued. And then, of course, there's the ECG collection. Something you recall that the Akufo-Addo Bawumia administration claimed that they had reduced electricity tariff sometime in 2018. It was not because the factors that led to production had reduced in terms of their cost. They just asked the ECG to reduce electricity tariff. In order to make that sustainable, they should have paid the difference, which would have been a subsidy, something they didn't pay. So it added to this debt. You remember that during COVID, they said that they had reduced electricity prices to cushion the consumer. It is all well and good to do so, but they needed to pay for the cost of producing that electricity, something they did not pay. Then fuel that has been supplied, they didn't pay. In addition to the Samson, the Sankofa gas fields. You know that in order to get the project going, we needed to establish a guarantee, what they call a partial risk guarantee. It cost $500 million, and actually the World Bank gave us money to do so. But it was not a gift. It was something that had to be paid for. In addition to this, GMPC also brought $120 million, making it $620 million. Then the car power arrangement also required a guarantee. So Litasco produced $170 million in guarantee. Again, because of the criminal mismanagement of the economy, something they did not pay the players in this sector. So the players drew down on this guarantee in excess of $800 million. But those guarantees must be restored. And it's actually an IMF requirement. In fact, some of them have reached as far as the U.S. Senate. And you've heard U.S. senators started making noise, who have started making noise, that the plug should be put on the IMF program because we owe these amounts. So these guarantees have to be re-established. If you put all of this together, you get 67 billion Ghana cedis, which is debt that must be paid. Government this year is giving the energy ministry 23 billion. So if we continue on that trajectory, in 3 years, we should pay it off. But something, if this were the only problem, it would not have been an issue because we have shown clear commitment that we will pay. In addition to this, every year, as we go forward, there's a shortfall in the electricity sector, meaning that there's a certain amount of money that must be paid because of how the tariff is structured. The critical one is the purchase of fuel. So forget about what has built up before we came to power. This year, $1.2 billion has to be coughed up by governments in order to buy fuel. Because the electricity bill you and I pay does not include the cost of fuel. So even as we are paying the legacy debt, more debt is going to compound if we don't find a way around this. There's something called reserve margin, or others used to call it excess capacity. Of course, the NPP engages in some shallow populism. They make it seem that it is criminal to have excess capacity. Nobody will invest in a power plant in Ghana if you don't give him a guarantee that that plant is not going to sit idle. Because it doesn't make sense to come and build a plant which is idle. And every power system must have a reserve margin. So that argument that the NPP makes is completely flawed. It is populist. In substance, there's nothing in it. And they have not signed one agreement that doesn't have a take or pay clause. Otherwise, the investors won't come, especially in a time where you are catching up. You have significant shortfall. In any event, all the excess capacity that we left, something has been used up. Today, as we speak, demand meets supply exactly. And there's no reserve margin. So, if we don't do something about it and even overlook the legacy debts, we are still going to pile up more debt if we don't find a solution to the fuel problem. Of course, naturally, you would say that, okay, so it is not part of the tariff calculation, so we'll add it. So if we do that, electricity prices will rise by 50%, which will impose too much hardships in our view. So we reckon that the most efficient way to do it is to add it to fuel. And also because, and as I worked in, Professor Bawku was making the point, because of the gains we've made with the city, there's been a significant drop in the price of fuel. Under the NPP, at the time, fuel sold for 20 cedis a gallon, diesel, and petrol was going for around 17 cedis a gallon. But please let me line, this is extremely important, since I beg you. So that drop means that today, the average Ghanaian is paying far less for fuel than they did just 5 or 6 months ago. So it is going to cushion consumers in that the effect of this additional 1 cedi will be negligible or non-existent. Remember that the original ESLA, which was imposed in 2015 to address some of these problems, actually was also imposed at a time when there was a similar drop. That time, it was a world market price that had dropped, so it meant that fuel prices were going to drop significantly. And then we brought it in there in order to generate revenue to address some of the problems that I have highlighted. So it is not an easy decision to make. And as I indicated, we understand fully that people will be agitated. It is to be expected. We respect that. Nobody quarrels with that. But if we don't do this, this debt overhang, which is no fault of ours, something, would drag us. And something, let me also make the point about the comparison with the levy. You see, if Dr. Bawumia, in all the 8 years the NPP was in power, had imposed only the levy, it wouldn't have been a problem. Ghanaians responded the way they did because by that time, over 30 other taxes had either been imposed or increased under Bawumia, who is complaining. In the period that we've been in power, How many taxes have we imposed? This is the first one we have had to do. That is even after removing about 3 taxes. And there are some others that we will look at. The COVID levy, with the finance minister indicated is a going review. And when he presents his next budget, we'll be speaking to. So, yes, Ghanaians have a right to complain. We respect that, but this is necessary. But there's a final point that I need to make, which is extremely important. The reason why we have even had to use liquid fuel, is that as I speak, annually, about 420 million standard cubic feet of gas a day is used up in power generation in Ghana. Even with that, there is still a gap of 150 million standard cubic feet a day. If we had that gas, we wouldn't need to import fuel. But we have to import fuel because of that shortfall. Now, gas is much cheaper. If you use gas, you need just $10 to get 1 MMBTU, which is the unit that is used to measure. The equivalent of that alone is $61 per barrel of oil. $61 per barrel of oil. So this levy is an interim measure meant to fill that gap. I am aware, and indeed I'm part of the committee that is working on the establishment of the second gas plant, which will enable us more than meet the gas demand for power generation. We expect that to come on stream in 3 to 4 years. Once that happens, fuel purchases would not be necessary. And indeed, the reason why the fuel purchase has even become a problem is a result of the NPP government policy. You know, in the past, it was VRA that was doing the importation. Through a fiat, they said ECG should do the importation. And then they brought in all manner of entities, Stratcom and Co., to start the importation. And yet they were unable to pay them. Okay. And this is what has led to
so
this.
So now you can rest here. Yeah, you can rest here for me. I had intended, Kofi, I'm coming to you. I had intended this to be his brief introductory, entrance, but this will be his substantive. The brief introductory entrance has meant